We're going to continue our study tonight on the evidence for the Bible, and we've come now to the evidence from the book of Daniel. Now, we've come through the authenticity of Scripture, the accuracy of Scripture is what we're on now, and then our last few studies will be on the transmission, how it was transmitted to us to be sure that what was originally written is what we have today. But on the subject of accuracy, we've spent most of our time there because it's rather easy to show that these books were written during these time periods. There's some debate among scholars, but it's rather substantial, the evidence that shows that these are authentic texts. The accuracy is the thing that nobody wants to admit, that the idea that these are true accounts of real miracles that really happened, not just some mythology of these ancient cultures, but real supernatural events, that's something that no atheist scholar wants to admit. It ruins his entire worldview. So that one's a lot more controversial, and yet we've shown that there's so much evidence for the accuracy of Scripture. We've come through not only the criterion of embarrassment, the types of things that they wouldn't be lying about, and all of these kinds of things. We looked at the evidence for the resurrection of Christ. We looked at several prophecies so far that we can show were written hundreds of years before they were fulfilled, and then they were fulfilled exactly as they were predicted. The most potent of all of these examples comes from the book of Daniel. And so today we're going to look at, we're in public proven fulfilled prophecy, that section, but we want to look at Daniel, specifically Daniel chapter 8. This chapter is dated around 550 BC. If you go with me to Daniel chapter 8, you can see why we can date that to 550 BC, and that is because he tells us, he dates each of his writings. He says in what year of what king he's writing. And here I should have had Daniel already pulled up in my Bible. I gotta do some filler. The interesting thing is, though, that it's not just Daniel's claim that he's writing during this year. We can show that he was writing during this time. We've already looked at some of the evidence for the authenticity of Daniel, but I'll kind of review that very quickly with you. But look at verse 1 of Daniel chapter 8. In the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar. Now, the fact that Daniel even mentions Belshazzar means he lived during the time of Belshazzar, because the actual king of the Babylonian Empire was Belshazzar's father, Nabonidus. And that's what was written down, that's what people knew after Babylon was conquered, that Nabonidus was the king of the empire. But Nabonidus, we have found ancient inscriptions that tell us that Nabonidus abandoned the city of Babylon and left it under the regency of his son Belshazzar. And for thousands of years, this was lost to history until I believe it was the 1800s, when they found the Nabonidus, these Nabonidus chronicles and the inscriptions, and found out that Belshazzar really was a person. So you can't have somebody writing hundreds of years later making this stuff up if they know about Belshazzar. This is an authentic text. And we have many other reasons in Daniel to know that this was actually written in 550 BC. Let's give you a couple. Remember that Daniel talks about Babylon as represented by lions. That means he knows and lives in Babylon, because on the walls of Babylon is like massive number of lions. There's massive carvings of lions everywhere. Lions are Babylon's thing. If you didn't live in Babylon during this time, you wouldn't know about it. Nebuchadnezzar, he describes him as very proud and being so filled with pride and arrogance over all of his buildings and what he built in the city. And that we have proven. You can actually find bricks in Babylon with Nebuchadnezzar's name stamped on them, many, many bricks, because he was so proud of himself for building the city. Daniel tells us about the fall of Babylon in Daniel chapter, I want to say it's 5. Yeah, I think it's 5. In Daniel chapter 5, and it's so detailed and so specific that they're having this party that night. And of course, that is what we know from history, that was when they invaded, Cyrus's army invaded, the Persians conquered Babylon. We know about Belshazzar because of Daniel, and other than Daniel, nobody knew until the 1800s that Belshazzar even existed. He mentions lions' dens being used as a punishment, which we've confirmed now in modern times, but they certainly would have known in ancient times after the time of Babylon and Persia. He talks about the prince of the eunuchs, a position that nobody would have realized even existed until now, when we've looked back at ancient inscriptions and seen they did have prince of eunuchs. It's in chapter 1. He even mentions what the walls of the palace are made out of: plaster. I mean, there's no question Daniel lived during the time of ancient Babylon. There's just no doubt, and he lived in Babylon. He had to. No way he knows these things if he's not actually there. So we know that this book is Babylonian time period old. So when he says he's writing in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, that should put us right about 550 BC. Now, if you want to say, well, maybe part of it was written then, and all the prophecy stuff was added in later, after it was all fulfilled. Well, we have copies of Daniel, multiple, copies. Now, when I say copy, technically, in a historian terminology, when you talk about copy, you're usually referring to a whole copy, like you have the whole thing. Usually in ancient scrolls, you're not going to have the whole thing. You're going to have pieces that are left over. So technically, they're fragments. But we have copies from Daniel that are technically fragments from the Dead Sea Scrolls. And these copies date back to the 200s BC, the 200s BC. And there's multiple copies in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So that means Daniel wasn't written in the 200s BC, right? It had to be written so long before that it's been around and hasn't just been copied once. It's been copied many, many times, and then they collected a bunch of copies and stored them away in this cave. So it has to be around for a long time by the 200s BC. So that means if we find anything in these prophecies that aren't fulfilled until after the 200s, we know this has to be written long before they were fulfilled. In fact, all the evidence tells us that it was written in 550 BC. And you have to wonder why these quote-unquote skeptics aren't ever skeptical of their doubt. It's like, you explain to me, why does Daniel show so much familiarity with ancient Babylon that nobody would have known? Explain that to me. Be skeptical of your doubt of Daniel for just a moment, with the kind of skepticism that you like to apply to belief in what it says. And the obvious conclusion would be, wow, Daniel's really written in the 550s. But no matter what, it has to be written before the 200s, or in the early 200s at the very latest, just based on the copies that we have. So let's look at the prophecy here and see when these things are fulfilled. Here's what it says. Verse 2 says, and I saw in a vision, and it came to pass when I saw that I was at Shushan the palace, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw in a vision, and I was by the river of Ulai. Then I lifted up mine eyes and saw, behold, there stood before the river a ram, which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. I saw the ram push westward and northward and southward, so that no beast might stand before him, neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand. But he did according to his will and became great. And as I was considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth and touched not the ground. And the he-goat had a notable horn between his eyes. And he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran unto him in the fury of his power. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram, and brake his 2 horns, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground, and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken. And for it came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven, and out of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south and toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. And it waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host, and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And an host was given to him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. Now, if you're Daniel, you're like, what is that? What did I just see? What in the world does this mean? This is really cool because not only do we have the prophecy here, but we're going to have an interpretation of the prophecy before the prophecy is fulfilled. It's not like afterwards, it's like, see, that was fulfilled. No, it's here's how this is going to play out. And it helps us, by the way, when we're studying prophecy that isn't fulfilled yet today, when we're talking about end times prophecy, because we know the types of things that we should expect in prophecy as symbolic and that kind of thing. Okay, verse 13. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto the certain saint, these are probably angels, which spake, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice, and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. And it came to pass, when even I, Daniel, had seen the vision, and sought for the meaning, then behold, there stood before me as the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of Ulai, which called and said, Gabriel, make this man to understand the vision. By the way, that's probably an appearance of Christ, a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ, when it says this man is telling Gabriel to do something. I mean, who's ordering Gabriel around? Probably Jesus. But you can actually see that probably more clearly in Daniel chapter 10, that's who that is. Verse 17, so he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid, and fell on my face. But he said unto me, understand, O son of man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. Now, as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep on my face toward the ground, but he touched me and set me upright, and said, behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation, for at the time appointed the end shall be. The ram which thou sawest having 2 horns are the kings of Media and Persia, and the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. We'll go over all this in just a moment. I just want to read it all just so it's all out there on the table. Now that being broken, whereas 4 stood up for it, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. And in the latter time, of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper in practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and shall by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand. And the vision of the evening and the morning which was told is true. Wherefore shut thou up the vision, for it shall be for many days. And I, Daniel, fainted and was sick certain days. Afterward I rose up and did the king's business, and I was astonished at the vision, but none understood it. Can you identify with Daniel? And I don't understand it either. Okay, well, now that it's been fulfilled, it's actually is pretty easy to understand if you study the history. So we're going to do that very briefly tonight. I want to say briefly to give you hope, but I do intend for it to be brief. We'll just see how this works. All right, let's start at the beginning. Now you can see on the screen there, I have the goat and the ram, just so you get a picture of it. Essentially, in the vision, there's this ram with one horn bigger than the other horn. And he's just going around pushing again. Nothing can stop him. He's just unstoppable. Until this goat comes with this giant, massive horn, And the goat with the big horn kills the ram. He's the only thing that can stop the ram. And he stops him and kills him. And then the big horn on the goat is broken, and 4 horns come up in its place. And out of one of those 4 horns, a little horn comes up. We'll talk about the horns later. But let's just look at the pieces of this prophecy individually. We'll start in verses 1 through 4. This is the Medo-Persian Empire. Look at verse 20, which gives us the interpretation. Then the ram which thou sawest having 2 horns are the kings of Media and Persia. Okay, well, there's the interpretation. So now we know what the ram is. Let's go back and look at what the ram said in verse 2. I saw in a vision, and it came to pass when I saw that I was at Shushan in the palace. By the way, Daniel is writing during the time of Belshazzar in the Babylonian Empire. Babylon is the capital of the Babylonian Empire. Belshazzar's in charge of Babylon. That's where Daniel is. But 550 AD, BC, there's something happening in 550 BC. Cyrus the Persian is leading the Persians in a revolt against the Medes. The Medes and Persians have this sort of alliance, but the Persians are sort of the underclass and the Medes are the ruling class. Well, in 550 BC, maybe as Daniel's writing this, maybe right after he writes it, in that same time period, Cyrus is in the process of leading a revolt against the Medes, and he's going to put down the Medes and conquer them, and now later on it's just going to be known as the Persian Empire, because the Medes become sort of like the servant class in the empire after the Persians put them down under Cyrus. This is all happening at the time that he's writing, and guess what becomes the capital of the Persian Empire? Susa, or Shushan, the same word, same city. Shushan, the palace. So in his dream, in his vision, he's in Babylon when he falls asleep, when he's having the vision. But in his vision, he finds himself in the capital that will be the capital of the Persian Empire. And so he sees himself in Susa, the palace. Interesting. And he sees, what does he see? This ram that represents the Medes and Persians, the Medo-Persian Empire. But what does it say about the ram? I lifted up mine eyes and saw, behold, there before the river a ram which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other. One of the 2 kingdoms is going to control the other one. Right? Medes and Persians, 2 horns, one is higher than the other. The other one's, now we know that's the case after Cyrus gets done his conquering. And I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward so that no beast might stand before him. No other kingdom could resist this kingdom. The beast is a kingdom, right? This animal. And so no other kingdom could resist the Medes and Persians. Now, Daniel in 550 is going to, this is a prediction at best, right? Right? If you don't believe in the supernatural nature of prophecy, then you're going to say, well, maybe he's just guessing. It's a bad guess because at the time when he's writing this, there's sort of like a civil war in the Medo-Persian kingdom. To think, they're going to become so powerful that nobody's going to be able to stand against them is a pretty incredible prediction, right? But maybe you could say that's just a prediction. He's just guessing at that. Well, it was a good guess. Actually, it was a bad guess that he got lucky on if there's no such thing as providence. But at any rate, okay, so he says, no beast is going to be able to stand against this kingdom, and no one's going to be able to deliver out of his hand, but he's going to do according to all his will. Okay, so in 546, Cyrus has not only conquered the Medes, and it's the Medo-Persian Empire, but the Persians now continue their expansion, and they conquer one of the other major nations that stood against them, and that's Lydia, or what we would call Turkey today. And after they conquer Lydia in 546, they turn their attention to Babylon. And Nabonidus has sort of abandoned the day-to-day in Babylon. And so Babylon becomes an easier target. And in 539 BC, they conquer Babylon. Now, at the time in 550 BC, when Daniel's writing this is a wild prediction that Babylon couldn't stand against this civil war nation that's going to come against them. Well, he was right. No one could stand against them, and then they would conquer Egypt later. So those are all taking place after the time of this prophecy. All right, now let's look at verse 5. It says, And as I was considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. By the way, just stop for a second and notice that Daniel keeps saying that he doesn't understand the vision. This is not something you say when you're trying to convince people, if you're trying to convince people of how good you got it, how good your prediction was. You're going to, say something that makes you look good. He's actually making himself look bad. Here's the vision. I don't understand it. Do you understand? It's a pretty interesting statement for somebody writing after the fact to show their intelligence, which proves that it wasn't written after the fact, right? I think you're following that. Okay, so look what it says. The he-goat comes from the west on the face of the whole ground, touched not the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. Okay, now look at verse 21. It gives us the interpretation. And the rough goat is the king of Grecia, the king of Greece. And the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Now, to this day, we call the first king of the Greek Empire, Alexander the Great, because he was great. I mean, just an incredible king. And even here in the Bible, in 550 BC, 200 years plus before Alexander the Great came around, he's already called the Great King. This is interesting. Okay, so this actually happened in 336 BC. 336. This is more than 200 years after 550 BC when this is being written. In 336 BC, Alexander was made the king of Macedon. At the time, the Greek city-states were all sort of divided, but he became the king in Macedonia, in Macedon, and he sort of unified the Greeks in anger at the Persians, because the Persians had invaded into Turkey and Asia Minor and Macedonia, and the Greeks were very angry about this invasion. They hadn't really taken Greece, what we would call Greece today, but they had taken a lot of the Greek city-states, and they were very angry about this. And so in 336, he becomes king. In 334, he's rallied everybody together, and he starts conquering the Persians. He conquered Persia and finally put down all opposition to his empire in 323 BC. So we're talking like 11 years after he starts the war, about 13 years after he becomes king, is when he puts down all opposition, and then he dies in 323 BC. Very short-lived, but yet he was so quick. In 13 years, really it's only 11 years of fighting, he's conquered the entire Persian Empire. And we talked last week about some of the ways that he did that, how he really struck fear in the heart of opposition. But look at what it says about the ram. Continue with me now. Oh, I didn't put it up on the screen. There it goes. 8:5, a king of Greece will rise against Persia. All right, now we're going to look at 6 and 7. He will be very angry at Persia. Look what it says. And he came to the ram that had two horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran unto him in the fury of his power. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him. I mean, he hates Persia. He's angry at them. This is part of the reason why Alexander was so successful. He went up against much larger armies, much more well-equipped armies. I think I said that right. And yet he beat them. And the reason was because all the Greeks were so very angry at the Persians. I mean, that adrenaline, that anger thing can really get you pumped. And they beat them quickly because of their anger. This is a well-known fact in history. And this is exactly what's predicted 200 years before it happens. Moved with choler against him, smote the ram and brake his two horns. And so he doesn't just beat the Persians, he beats the Medes. And there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Nobody can beat Alexander. Nobody could stop the ram. Nobody could stop the Persians. And then nobody can stop the Greece. And it's even named what these empires are, Greece and Persia. This is just incredible. Okay, so he's going to be very angry at Persia. Alexander did rally his forces in anger for the Persian invasion into Lydia or Asia Minor. Now let's look at verse 7. He will utterly conquer the Persian Empire. We just mentioned that, so let's just, for sake of time, we'll move along. He's not just going to be angry and conquer some of it, he's going to conquer it all, the entire Persian Empire, and Alexander the Great did. Now let's look at verse 8 and compare this to verse 22. It says in verse 22 that now that being broken up, whereas 4 stood up for it, 4 kingdoms shall stand out of the nation, but not in his power. Now look back at verse 8. That's an interpretation of what's happening in verse 8. Verse 8 says, "Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven." This we know to be true. The prediction is that 4 kingdoms, that he will die, he'll be broken, and that his kingdom will be divided 4 ways. This is exactly what happened to the Greek Empire. Alexander conquered Persia and almost immediately died. Some say he was poisoned, some say he was assassinated, others say he just came down with a weird disease and died, but he died very quickly after conquering Persia. And what happened to his kingdom? Well, it got divided into the kingdom of Macedon and the kingdom of Asia Minor. And so you got Macedonia and Asia Minor there. And then you have the Seleucid Empire of Greece that took the region of Syria, Babylon, Persia, that kind of thing. And then you have the Ptolemies that took Egypt. And really that's in the wrong order, because the Ptolemies took Syria and Babylon and Egypt all together. And then one of his ambassadors, one of his regents that he sent out to take Babylon, rebelled against him, the Seleucid the first, I think. And then now you have 4 empires. So what happens is, after Alexander's death, you can look this up, it's the Wars of the Diadochi. I think I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. But they're from 322, right after Alexander died, to 275 BC. And these are Alexander's generals fighting over his kingdom. And when the dust all settled, there were 4 kingdoms. You have one to the south, one to the north, and then one to the east and west of what used to be known as Greece. And so you have north, south, east, and west. Well, what does it say? There's going to be 4 kingdoms that come up and take over after this one horn is broken, and they're going to be divided to the 4 winds, or the 4 directions under heaven. This is crazy. This is so specific. All right? Now that's just the Alexander the Great part. Now let's look, and we'll do this very quickly, at the horns, because this is the whole point of Daniel 8. It's leading us to a picture that is in these horns of an end times thing that's going to happen that still hasn't happened yet. But here, this guy, this Greek king, is going to be a picture of the end times Antichrist. So this is all, chapter 8 is all stuff that's already been fulfilled, but it leads us into chapter 9, which is going to give us a similar scenario, but something that hasn't been fulfilled yet, and it's supposed to be in the Roman Empire. Which is why we know the Roman Empire has to be sort of reforged at some point. Okay, so here we go, chapter 8, verse 9. And we can compare this to verse 23. Verse 9 said, "And out of one of them," those 4 kingdoms that come out of Greece, "out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south and toward the east and toward the pleasant land." Now go with me to verse 23 through 24, and you can see the interpretation of this. "In the latter times of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power, and he shall destroy wonderfully, and he shall prosper in practice, and shall destroy the mighty and holy people." So here the claim is that near the end of the Greek Empire, that's what it says. It says, "And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great towards the south and towards the east and towards the pleasant land." In verse 23, "in the latter time of their kingdom." So this is near the end of the Greek Empire. And that is true. Actually, Rome is now on the rise when Antiochus Epiphanes comes around, who fulfills this prophecy. Now, I won't get too into detail into Antiochus Epiphanes now, because we'll definitely talk more about him when we talk about Daniel 11, because Daniel 11 goes through these wars of the Greek Empire, the 4 divisions of the Greek Empire, and it gives a lot of details, so I'll just be repeating myself a lot. But essentially, Antiochus swindled his way into power, probably did some assassinating, and it was a really backhanded deals, and he just got the power, but it wasn't his. 24 says his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. It's exactly a perfect description of Antiochus Epiphanes. We'll talk more about that when we get to Daniel 11, which we might do in our next study, and then come back to Daniel chapter 9, which is very interesting as well. Let's look at the next one. In verse 10, he will exalt himself and assault the worship of God's people, because we saw that a little bit in verse 24. Verse 10 says, and it waxed great even to the host of heaven. Now, this is a phrase, the stars, the host of heaven. This is drawing on the symbolism from Genesis. Remember when Joseph has a dream and his brothers are stars in heaven and they're all bowing down to him? That's what's being drawn on here in Daniel. Often the people of Israel are called the stars of heaven or the hosts of heaven. So when it says he's going to be great against the host of heaven and stamp some of them down to the ground, and in verse 24, his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. He shall destroy wonderfully and shall prosper in practice and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. Who's that talking about? Well, that's talking about Israel. Verse 25, and through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, that's God, but he shall be broken without hand. So he's going to stand up against God, or maybe some people think this is talking about the high priest of Israel, but I think it's probably more talking about God. Either way, it's an assault against the Jews and their religion. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about Antiochus Epiphanes. He comes on the scene in 175 BC. 175. We're after the 200s, guys. I mean, if you want to say that this was written like as late as possible, you still have to be in the 200s. Now 175 is when Antiochus comes around. So this still is supernatural prophecy, even if it wasn't written in 550, but it was certainly written in 550 BC. Antiochus Epiphanes comes around in 175 BC. He swindles his way into control of the Seleucid Greek Empire, the one that controls Syria and Babylon and that region. And his main warring is against the southern Greek Empire, the Ptolemies in Egypt. It says that he's going to conquer toward the east and towards the south. Look what it says, verse 9, which wax exceeding great toward the south and towards the east and towards the pleasant land. The east is probably speaking from him. He sort of set up in Babylon. The east would be probably the region of Syria, which was sort of contested at the time that he took the throne. And so he conquers into Syria. He conquers into the Holy Land, the people of Israel. It says towards the pleasant land. And he also conquers down into Egypt. He starts to conquer the Ptolemies. We'll talk more about how he wanted to completely conquer the Ptolemies and then turn his sights on Rome, but Rome wouldn't let him, and he got very angry about that. But at any rate, he does exactly what's explained here. And it says here in verse 14 that he will successfully control the Jewish temple for 2,300 days. Verse 14, and he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. So he's going to come in, he's going to persecute the Jews, he's going to stamp them down, and he's going to pervert. Look, verse 13, then I heard one saying, he says, how long shall be, there's right in the middle of verse 13, the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot. 2,300 days. That's just under 8 years. Just under 8 years, 2,300 days. Okay, you say, well, what is that? Let me give you a little history and we'll close. All right? In one of his first major aggressions against the Jewish religion, so Antiochus, he called himself Antiochus Epiphanes. The word Epiphanes means the image of God on earth. He thought he was Zeus incarnate. And so he called himself Antiochus Epiphanes. The Jews had another word for him. They called him Antiochus Epimanes, which means the madman, which is more accurate. They like to do play on words, you know. But anyway, people in America will make up, words for Joe Biden and everything. That's what they did for Antiochus. Well, he was a madman, and he was convinced that he was God. So as he comes through and he conquers an area, you worship him as God, you're good. You can keep your other gods on the side, but he's God. Well, he's Zeus. And most people are just fine, whatever, we don't care. But Israel says, no. Well, we're commanded to only worship one God. We're not going to worship you. So he hates Israel. And he starts to, some of his first egregious act against Israel is in 175 BC, like right away. He sells the high priesthood. You're supposed to not have a new high priest until the old high priest dies. He doesn't like the high priest because he's not worshiping him. So he sells the high priesthood to a guy named Jason, who's not even a Levite. The Levites have to be the high priests. He sells the high priesthood to a guy named Jason. Now, Jason gets into the high priesthood. He sort of convinces him, hey, look, I'll get them all to, be more Hellenized or more Greek in their culture. And so Jason starts making little changes, sets up a Greek sporting arena outside of the temple where they're like, Greek sports are nude. So here's a bunch of nude Greek guys with not being circumcised running around outside the temple, all kinds of things like that. But he doesn't do any direct persecution. It just kind of really starts to corrupt the Jewish religion. When it goes really south is a guy named Menelaus. In 172 BC, 3 years later, Menelaus, who's also not a Levite, and he even has a name that's a Greek name, he sort of swindles Jason and convinces Antiochus to make him the new high priest. And when he becomes the high priest, now we have in the temple perversion against God. Let me just tell you some things that Menelaus and Antiochus did together. He plundered the temple treasury to meet the financial obligations for his bribe to Antiochus. So when he gets into the high priesthood, he takes the temple treasury and gives it to Antiochus to pay him off for the bribe. That's how he became the high priest. He instigated the murder of Onias III. Onias III was the high priest before the high priesthood was sold to Jason. And so when Menelaus gets in there, before up till now, it's just like, well, you're not really the high priest. You're a false high priest. You're a false high priest. Now he kills the real high priest. So there is no high priest except for this false guy, Menelaus, who's not even a Levite. So until then, people were saying, well, Onias III is the real high priest. Onias III is speaking out against what Jason is doing. Menelaus gets in there, murders Onias III. And he also persuaded Antiochus to enforce decrees that outlawed Jewish religious practices, such as circumcision and Sabbath observance. You're supposed to circumcise your child on the 8th day, your son, after they're born. If they found a woman who circumcised their child on the 8th day, or any day really, but on the 8th day, they would kill the baby, tie the baby around the neck of the woman, march the woman off to a cliff, and make her walk off the cliff. It was the most terrible thing. This is Menelaus, the high priest of Israel. Just terrible stuff. They would make sure that you didn't observe the Sabbath. They would force you to eat pork. If they found out that you were observing the dietary laws, they would come and say, eat this pork, or you're going to be stretched out on this torture device and killed slowly, or all your skin's going to be sliced off. This is really interesting reading in the book of Maccabees if you want to read it, if you got the stomach for it. He supported anti-Jewish decrees. His influence led to the persecution of Jews who resisted Hellenization, with punishments including death for maintaining traditional practices, contributing to the broader suppression that sparked the Maccabean revolt. This is because of what Menelaus does in league with Antiochus. They set up an idol in the temple to Zeus. That's worshiping Antiochus in the temple. Because of this, the Maccabees get so upset that they revolt, and they end up taking back the city of Jerusalem. They took back the city of Jerusalem and purified the temple in 164 BC. Now let's just do a little bit of math. 172, 164. This is 8 years. Now we don't know the exact day when Menelaus became the high priest or when he started his aggression, and we don't know the exact day when the Maccabees retook the temple and purified it. But what we have is probably just under 8 years between this terrible abomination of the temple and its purification. And what do we have according to this prophecy? Well, it's going to be 2,300 days, just under. If I'm not mistaken, I think that's just under 7 years. Am I right? No, just under 8 years. Maybe I'm getting it backwards. But either way, we have the exact right period of time there for all of that. Okay, so now that's, by the way, that's 360 day years. So we have the exact right period of time. We have exactly what's going on, everything that the prophecy is saying, so specifically done, 200, 300 years before it happens. From the time of Menelaus until the purification of the temple would have been around 8 years, which would have been very close to, if not exactly, 2,300 days. And then it says he will die but will not be killed. Let's just close with that. He will die but will not be killed. I think I actually wrote down in one place 8 years, but it's actually like a little under 7 years. So I think I'm adding a year there in one of those. But at any rate, it's the right period of time, and I'll have to add a correction to that next week. So verse 25, we'll close with this. And he thought, he through his policy, he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand. He shall magnify himself in his heart. And by peace and destroy many, he shall stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand. What happened to Antiochus? Well, let me just tell you. 164 BC, after hearing that the Jews had retaken the temple, he fell ill with a severe disease, possibly a gastrointestinal disorder or infection. And after receiving news of the Jewish revolt's success, he suffered intense pain, mental distress, and physical decay, leading to his death. Some historians suggest he may have died of natural causes exacerbated by stress. At any rate, he just all of a sudden got really, really sick and just died. Exactly the way the prophecy said. Now, the guy like Antiochus, the way he usually is going to die, he's going to get assassinated. He's going to get murdered. He's going to get conquered and killed. That Daniel, 300 years before this, is going to predict not only that he's going to come, what he's going to do, what the time period that he's going to do it, but also he's going to predict the way he's going to die, that he's not going to be killed by someone else. He's just going to die by the hand of God. Is pretty interesting. Pretty interesting. This is not the greatest and the most convincing of the prophecies of Daniel, but it certainly is one of the greatest and most convincing prophecies of the Scripture. And one of the reasons is because we have such a high level of evidence to show when Daniel was written. I'll have to correct the number of days. 2,300, I think, comes out to like now just under 7 years. And I think the way that you can count Menelaus becoming the high priest and then starting his all the evil and all that stuff is still going to be right around the same period of time. So I'll have to give you more clarity on that. Any other questions before we go tonight? Okay, all right, lots of information here, but I think it's helpful. We're looking forward to getting into Daniel 11, Daniel 9, and then we'll get into the transmission of the text, and then we'll be done with the series. We're almost done. We're so close, Let's pray. Father in heaven, I thank you so much for the evidence of the Scripture. I thank you for helping us as we study books and passages of the Bible that we often read and just it goes way over our head. We don't understand what's going on. We don't grasp it. But thank you for this time when we can slow down and realize your purpose in this is to show that you are sovereign, you control all things, you know them before they happen, you make sure things happen the way that works into your plan. You are in charge, and help us to take this, if for nothing else, as a good reason to submit our lives to you and faithfully serve you, because you are the almighty God of all the universe. And we thank you for the proof of this fact. We pray all these things in Jesus' name.